Some battles aren't fought in the ring. They're fought in silence every single day. Lincoln High wasn't just a school. It was a world split by invisible lines of privilege and power. And in this world, Marcus Rivera was nearly invisible. But not because he wanted to be. 16 years old, barely 5'6", and wrapped in thrift store clothes that hung on his wiry frame, Marcus didn't command attention. He avoided it. Every scuff on his worn-out sneakers, every tired shadow beneath his eyes, told a quiet story no one bothered to hear. He moved through the polished hallways like a ghost, shouldering his battered backpack with the silent precision of someone who knew exactly where not to be. In a school where students flaunted designer bags, luxury phones, and weekend ski trip stories, Marcus was the reminder they all tried to forget, that poverty could walk beside privilege and still be unseen. He came from the other side of town, the side with bars on the windows and forgotten dreams. The only reason he walked those hallways at all was because of a scholarship, a golden ticket handed to him after his old school was shut down from budget cuts. A charity case, some whispered, a diversity stat, others claimed. But Marcus carried something no one else could see, the weight of a promise made in a gym that no longer existed, to a father who no longer breathed. Miguel Rivera had once been a Golden Gloves champion. He taught Marcus not just how to punch, but how to endure, how to fight with discipline, not emotion. Never outside the ring, his father would say. Your fists are for defense, not destruction. But that world was gone now. A car crash took his father, and with it, the gym and everything stable in Marcus's life. What remained was a boy who used to dream of championships, now rationing 5 crumpled dollar bills for lunch, his mother skipping meals just so he wouldn't go hungry. Still, Marcus didn't complain. He showed up. He studied. He helped his mother pay rent by working early morning shifts at the grocery store before class, and he tried desperately to stay invisible. But some predators don't wait for their prey to speak. They strike simply because they can. Enter Brett Lawson. Tall, athletic, wealthy. The kind of student who never had to earn attention. He commanded it. His father owned half the town's car dealerships. He drove a BMW to school, wore the latest designer threads, and led his own personal pack of hyenas, Tommy Rodriguez and Kevin Park, both as cruel as they were loyal. Together, they called themselves the Elite Squad. Others just called them untouchable. And to them, Marcus was the perfect target. On the morning it all began, Marcus held $5 bills in his pocket, his entire food budget for the week. That was the day Brett stepped out from behind a row of lockers, smirking like a wolf. Well, what do we have here? The air turned cold. The hallway felt tighter. And though Marcus didn't know it yet, that moment, the way his stomach dropped, the humiliation, the hunger, the shame, it would be the beginning of a chain reaction that would rock the entire school. Because Brett didn't just pick on the wrong kid. He picked on the wrong fighter. When cruelty becomes routine, silence becomes survival. Every hallway had its own soundtrack, locker slams, laughter, buzzing notifications. But for Marcus Rivera, it was the sound of footsteps closing in behind him, the cadence of entitlement, of Brett Lawson and his elite squad circling like vultures above a wounded soul. Each day began not with math or literature, but with a ritual, one where Marcus paid his toll in silence, shame, and crumpled bills. The Brett Lawson Protection Fund, they called it, a joke to some, a threat to others. To Marcus, it was a tax on existing. At first, it was $1 here, 50 cents there, little cuts disguised as teasing. But the moment Marcus gave in, the demands evolved. $5 was now the minimum. If he had it, they took it. If he didn't, they made sure to take something more valuable, his dignity. Marcus didn't just lose money. He lost pieces of himself in that hallway. His silence, his stillness, his refusal to fight back, they took it as weakness. They didn't see the restraint, the control, the promise tucked behind clenched fists and tightened jaws. Every insult they hurled, every shove, every cruel whisper about his mom cleaning toilets or his dad being dead and gone, each one chipped away at his spirit. The worst part wasn't the bullying. It was that no one stopped it. Other students passed by like he was invisible. Some glanced, then quickly looked away. Others even laughed quietly, relieved it wasn't happening to them. Teachers? If they ever saw anything, they acted like they didn't. Averted eyes, redirected lectures. They had lessons to get through, and Marcus's pain didn't fit in the curriculum. Brett had power. His father funded the athletic department. No one wanted to cross that line, and so Marcus paid. Day after day, dollar by dollar, silence became his shield, endurance his armor. But the attacks were no longer just verbal. His locker, once a private space in a hostile school, had become a canvas for vandalism. Spray-painted words like charity case or welfare boy would appear overnight. His textbooks were sometimes torn or stolen. One day, he found his backpack dumped out in the hallway, its contents kicked and scattered. Another day, a half-eaten sandwich was left on his desk, labeled for the cleaning lady's kid. The note was taped in front of the entire class. The teacher had walked in, glanced at it, and simply started the lesson. Online, things were worse. Fake accounts popped up, mocking Marcus with memes and edited photos. One post showed a janitor's mop photoshopped into his hand. Another had his face pasted onto a begging cartoon figure, captioned, "Spare change for the rich kid's lunch tax." He reported them, but nothing happened. The accounts would vanish, then reappear under different names. It was a ghost he couldn't chase. Marcus tried to stay focused. School, work, sleep, repeat. He told himself he could survive this, that it was temporary, that if he just kept his head down it would stop. But deep down, he knew that wasn't true. He remembered what his father used to say in the gym. The ring shows you who you are when there's no one left to impress. No cameras, no crowds, just you and the truth. And the truth was, Marcus was breaking. There were days when he skipped lunch entirely, too ashamed to enter the cafeteria with empty pockets. His stomach growled through afternoon classes, but he told himself it was better than handing over money he couldn't afford to lose. Other days, he spent his last dollars on vending machine snacks and prayed they wouldn't find him. But they always did. And every time, the same words echoed. In the ring, fight with honor. Outside the ring, walk away with dignity. But where was the dignity in this? Marcus's strength wasn't just physical, it was in his restraint. In every moment he could have snapped, could have thrown a punch, but didn't. In every insult he swallowed, every punch he held back, every time he walked away. But even warriors bleed. Even the strongest hearts begin to fracture when the world pretends not to see. He found himself staring longer at the photo taped inside his locker, the one of him and his dad, gloves raised after his first amateur win. The grins on their faces, the pride, the fire in his young eyes. He missed that boy, the one who believed discipline was enough, who thought being good would shield him from bad things. But discipline alone doesn't protect you from a system built to look the other way. He came home later now, spent more hours bagging groceries, stacking cans, collecting extra shifts to cover the stolen money. He told his mother he was saving up, for books, for college. She believed him, wanted to believe him. And Marcus couldn't bring himself to tell her the truth, not when she was already sacrificing so much. Working double shifts, skipping meals, scrubbing floors for families who drove past her son in luxury cars like he was invisible. The lies spread at school were worse than the jokes. Rumors that his mom had been fired for stealing. That he was only accepted to Lincoln High because the school needed diversity. That he faked poverty to get scholarships. That he wasn't even from this town. And still, the teachers said nothing. They noticed his grades slipping. They commented on his late assignments. But none of them asked why. None asked about the bruises on his arm or the bags under his eyes. They treated him like a puzzle they didn't have time to solve. Easier to blame the scholarship kid than admit the system was broken. But inside Marcus, something was changing. Not rage, not revenge, just a growing certainty. This isn't sustainable. This silence is costing more than it protects. Something has to give. He started feeling it in his hands, shaky, twitchy, like muscle memory trying to speak, like every lesson his father taught him was scratching its way to the surface. You can fight with anger, or you can fight with purpose, his father once said. Anger makes you sloppy, purpose makes you powerful. For now, Marcus still chose silence, but his silence had a time limit, and deep down, everyone could feel it. A storm was brewing, and when it hit, it wouldn't come with noise. It would come with purpose. Sometimes the mask doesn't slip, it shatters. It was a Tuesday morning when Marcus finally broke. Not in a loud, explosive way, but the quiet kind of break that snaps a person inward first, then outward like lightning. The school bell hadn't even rung yet, but already something felt off. His locker, usually scuffed but untouched, now hung open like a mouth left gasping. Papers spilled like wounded soldiers across the floor. His textbooks were ripped apart. And worst of all, there it was, face down and crumpled, his father's photo, the one he kept taped inside his locker door. The only one. Its corners were curled, edges muddy with sneaker prints. Someone had stepped on it, intentionally. Marcus didn't move for a moment. He just stared at it. Not at the books, not the mess, just the photo. He dropped to his knees and carefully picked it up, hands trembling. Every inch he smoothed out felt like trying to patch his father's face back together. He didn't notice the crowd gathering or the phones pointing, only the sharp voice that sliced through it all. Oops, looks like someone had a little accident. Brett? Again. Always Brett. Marcus didn't look up. Couldn't. If he saw Brett's smirk in that moment, he didn't trust what his body might do. But Brett wasn't done. You know, this might not happen if you paid your fees on time. That protection fund? It's there for a reason. Before Marcus could even process the venom behind those words, a voice rose behind Brett, soft, sure, and unexpected. Leave him alone. Jessica Martinez. A quiet girl. Always alone. Always reading. The kind of student who blended into beige lockers and faded carpets. But now she stood still as stone with a stack of books in her arms and fire in her voice. He hasn't done anything to you, she said, voice shaking but firm. Brett turned, eyes lighting up like a predator catching fresh scent. Well, looks like Scholarship Boy has a girlfriend. How cute. Jessica's cheeks reddened, but she didn't move. I said leave him alone. Tommy and Kevin flanked her now, like shadows closing in. Marcus rose slowly, that photo still gripped in his hand like a torn badge of honor. He knew what this was. This wasn't about him anymore. They were going after Jessica now, just for caring. You know what I think? Brett sneered, gesturing to Tommy. I think our little charity case has been holding out on us. Tommy yanked Marcus's backpack from the floor and dumped it out. Books, a half-eaten granola bar, a worn work uniform, and his wallet. Brett snatched it up. Inside, a single $20 bill, the one Marcus had saved all month, stocking shelves, mopping floors, skipping his own lunch for his mother's birthday. Brett held it up like a trophy. What do we have here? Looks like Scholarship Boy's been lying to us. That's not mine to give, Marcus said, voice hoarse. It's for my mother's birthday. Aw, Brett cooed. How touching. But I think this covers the back payments, plus interest. And then he slipped the bill into his pocket. That was the moment something in Marcus shifted. Not broke, shifted. His body straightened, not in rage, but in balance. Chin tucked, feet shoulder-width apart, fists unclenched, relaxed, calm. It was a stance Brett didn't recognize. But Marcus did. It was the stance of every fight he'd ever trained for. The voice of his father echoed in his mind again. You don't fight with anger. You fight with purpose. This, right now, was purpose. You gonna do something? Scholarship Boy? Brett taunted. You finally gonna grow a spine? Marcus exhaled once. Yeah, he said softly. I think I am. Brett lunged first, a mistake. A wild punch, all ego and no technique. Marcus slid to the side with ease, like water finding a crack. He came back with a textbook perfect left hook. Brett hit the ground before anyone even understood what happened. Gasps spread. Silence. Then chaos. Tommy roared and charged, but Marcus was already moving. He ducked, stepped inside, and drove an uppercut straight into Tommy's core. The bigger boy folded like a tent in a storm. Kevin tried to tackle him from behind, but Marcus had heard the footsteps. He spun, broke the grip with a fluid twist, and snapped a right cross across Kevin's jaw. It was over in less than 30 seconds. 3 bullies, bigger, stronger, untouchable, lay on the ground, gasping. Phones recorded everything. Students stared, wide-eyed. Marcus stood above them, calm, precise, barely breathing hard. He looked down at Brett, blood trickling from the boy's nose. You're going to give me back every dollar, every single one you took. Brett stammered. This isn't over. Marcus crouched to eye level. Yes, it is. You touch me again, anyone, and I won't hold back next time. He turned to Jessica, helping her gather her books. Her hands were shaking, so were his. But when their eyes met, something passed between them. Not fear, not pity, respect. As they stood together, surrounded by stunned silence and buzzing phones, Marcus spoke. Not to the crowd, but to the system that had failed him. No more silence. And just like that, the quiet boy, the one no one saw coming, rewrote the rules. You thought no one was watching. Turns out, everyone was. It didn't take long for the school's ecosystem to react. Before the dust had fully settled and before Brett could wipe the blood from beneath his nose, phones had already done their job. Dozens of students had captured everything. From the moment Marcus stood tall to the precision takedowns that left Brett, Tommy, and Kevin crumpled on the hallway floor like deflated giants. The silence didn't last. Whispers turned to gasps, gasps to murmurs, and soon murmurs became a tidal wave of conversation that flooded Lincoln High. By the time Principal Williams stormed down the hall, flanked by 2 assistant staff and 1 nervous-looking campus security officer, he was already too late to stop the footage from spreading. It had hit social media like wildfire, carried by students who'd never even acknowledged Marcus before. They posted clips, slow-mo breakdowns, and even added music under his takedowns. But beyond the spectacle, something more powerful was taking shape. Truth. In his office, Principal Williams sat behind his wide oak desk, now stacked high with student-written accounts, messages from parents, and screenshots of weeks' worth of silent suffering, harassment, extortion, vandalism, threats. Witnesses who had once turned blind eyes were now scribbling handwritten confessions in support of Marcus Rivera. Even the quietest students, the ones who had never spoken above a whisper, were coming forward, one by one, together. Marcus sat across from the principal, hands folded, face composed. He was ready to be expelled. That was what he'd expected. But instead, Principal Williams studied him with a long, unreadable expression. Then he said, "It seems the incident was a reaction to ongoing harassment. Harassment that, frankly, our staff should have seen and stopped." There was a pause. "I don't condone fighting, but sometimes people are pushed beyond reason." From the corner of the office, Brett sat with his arms folded, a gauze strip under his nose and ice pressed to his jaw. His parents sat beside him. His father, red-faced and fuming, looked ready to unleash legal hell. A prominent businessman and school donor, Mr. Lawson had always considered the school an extension of his influence, a place where his son was untouchable. But not today. Today, his son was the viral face of humiliation, and no donation could fix it. Principal Williams turned to Marcus again. "Given the evidence, I believe an in-school suspension is more appropriate than expulsion." Marcus blinked, not because it was unfair, but because it was lenient. But more than that, it was just. For once, justice had shown up, and the school, it was changing. The halls, once echoing with laughter at Marcus's expense, now buzzed with hushed awe. Students approached him in between classes, not with caution, but curiosity, gratitude. Some told him about their own run-ins with Brett. Others simply said, "Thank you." Jessica, now always at his side, was no longer just the girl who stood up for him. She had become his closest friend, his ally, and in many ways his mirror. They were both quiet souls, overlooked and underestimated. But now they walked together through halls that once swallowed them whole. Heads higher, shoulders straighter. At lunch, they no longer sat alone. Other kids began to gravitate toward them. Students who had never found the courage to speak up now found themselves drawn to the boy who had and the girl who backed him. Even the teachers noticed. In classrooms, they called on Marcus more. Not out of pity, but because they had started to see what had always been there. A mind sharp with discipline, a student who'd survived hardship most of them could barely imagine. The same teachers who once failed to notice the bruises now looked more carefully at the faces they passed every morning. The school itself had shifted. The Brett Lawson Protection Fund jokes disappeared overnight. So did the casual slurs, the shoulder bumps, and the whispered threats. Brett, now stripped of his invincibility, slunk through the hallways like a ghost. His friends stayed loyal for a time, but even they couldn't ignore the weight of the change around them. He had become a cautionary tale. And Marcus became a symbol. It wasn't about the punches. It was about the principle, about standing up when it's hardest, about speaking when your voice shakes, about protecting what little you have when the world tries to take it all from you. A quiet revolution was underway. You could see it in the subtle changes. Students who once watched in silence now stepped in when others were picked on. Teachers pulled students aside more often, asking real questions instead of checking boxes. The walls of Lincoln High had absorbed years of cruelty, but now, for the first time, they were learning how to echo courage instead. Marcus was healing, not just physically, but internally. For years, he'd walked the line between restraint and eruption. He'd carried his father's promise like a weight around his chest: never use your fists outside the ring. But what he realized now was this: purpose gives you permission. Not to harm, but to protect. To draw a line in the sand and say, not here, not anymore. He'd kept the promise, in spirit if not letter. He never swung in anger, only in defense, and only when silence had gone on too long. The $20 Brett stole was never returned. But Marcus didn't need it anymore, because what he gained that day was far more valuable. He got his voice back, and in doing so, he gave it to others. His mother noticed too. That evening, when Marcus came home and handed her a small handmade card for her birthday, crafted from torn notebook paper and scrawled with love in messy ink, she didn't ask about the missing 20. She didn't need to. She saw it in his posture, in the way he held his head higher. The wariness hadn't gone, but something else had arrived in its place. A quiet resolve. "I'm proud of you," she said simply. And those 4 words, spoken softly over a plate of reheated rice and beans, meant more than any applause from a crowd. At school, the story kept spreading. News outlets picked it up. Scholarship student takes down bullies in viral video. Underdog boxer defends himself after months of harassment. Some headlines focused on the fight, but others focused on what mattered more: how a system ignored the signs, how a school turned its back, and how one kid stood up when no one else would. Lincoln High would never be the same again, because Marcus Rivera had proved that sometimes the quietest voices aren't weak. They're just waiting for the right moment to roar. And this was just the beginning. Strength was never just about fists. It was always about the promise. Weeks passed, but the moment still echoed in Marcus's bones. Not the punches or the cheers, but the silence that followed. The kind of silence that didn't feel empty anymore. It felt earned. In the quiet of his room, late at night, Marcus often found himself staring at that same old photo on his nightstand. His father's arm wrapped around his shoulders, both of them smiling beneath the gym's flickering lights, gloves raised like a promise to the future. Miguel Rivera had once told him, "The ring teaches you what you're made of when everything else is stripped away." Marcus understood now. He hadn't broken the promise he made at his father's grave. He had honored it in the only way that truly mattered. His fists weren't weapons. They were the last line of protection, the final resort when silence had become surrender. What he did that day in the hallway wasn't about pride or revenge. It was about reclaiming something sacred: dignity. His mother, Elena, saw the change in him too. She didn't need explanations. She knew the toll, knew the price of surviving in a world that demanded so much from those who had so little. She had sacrificed everything, and now her son was doing the same. Not by giving in, but by standing up. Jessica, too, had transformed. The quiet girl who once melted into the edges of classrooms now stood proudly in the center of attention, not for vanity, but for voice. She joined the debate team, her arguments sharp, her presence undeniable. When asked what had changed, she always gave the same answer: "Marcus showed me that courage doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just refuses to step back." And Marcus, he wasn't invisible anymore. He walked through the halls of Lincoln High like someone who had finally come home. Students nodded at him. Teachers invited him into discussions. Even the lunch lady started giving him extra portions. Not out of sympathy, but because he was no longer just the scholarship kid. He was Marcus Rivera, the one who took a stand when no one else would. Brett, once a towering figure of intimidation, now drifted like a ghost through the corridors. His voice, once loud and cruel, had withered into silence. No one looked to him for approval anymore. No one followed him blindly. His power had dissolved not in the punch, but in the truth that followed it. He became a reminder of what happens when cruelty goes unchecked, and what happens when someone finally says, "Enough." Marcus didn't gloat. He didn't need to. His strength wasn't about domination. It was about protection, about resilience, about stepping into the storm, not because you want to fight, but because walking away would mean betraying something bigger than yourself. And now, everywhere he went, he carried that promise, not in his fists, but in his presence. His final thought, whispered not aloud but deeply, internally, was this: strength is not about how hard you hit, it's about what you stand for when standing costs you everything. This was never about being a hero, it was about becoming a legacy. And yet, as the final bell rang and the school emptied out into golden afternoon light, Marcus knew one thing for certain: this is only the beginning.